the Fantasy Edge podcast. I'm your host, Chris Dell. Today's show is brought to you by bettingpredators.com, the Bet Life podcast, and Baller X Labs. We got a one-of-one guest for you today, folks. Our guest is one of the sharpest minds in best ball, an actual real-life fantasy football millionaire, and someone who's now building something really exciting at the intersection of fantasy, sports betting, and prediction markets. He was featured on the front page of Rolling Stone, yes, the Rolling Stone magazine, for being one of the most successful fantasy players straight up just in the world. He's also the creator of FNN60.com and the founder of the brand new prediction market community called predictq, which is launching in Q2 2026. You can find him on Twitter at Justin Herzig. That's Justin Herzig. Justin, welcome to the show, man. Really glad to have you here.
Chris, appreciate it. I'm excited, and yeah, we are last day of March, and it feels like football season just year round. We've got a whole bunch of I'm pumped. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, man. It's really cool to have you on during the off season, right? Because what are people doing? There's no NFL to bet on. There's fantasy redraft isn't really at that time yet. Even dynasty. But you're heavy in the best ball streets, obviously, right? And obviously in the prediction market streets as well. So how did you kind of get to this interesting intersection of niche fantasy sports content and then also kind of your tech and business background kind of mixing into that?
Yeah, for sure. So, I started off, always been a fan of sports. My background, college, I worked at different sports agencies. I thought I was going to go become the next Jerry Maguire, hey, live on the road, be a baseball scout. Had that opportunity, but ended up turning it down because making $30K on the road and recruiting high school and college baseball players was going to be a tough grind. And so ended up going more the corporate route. Did some banking, worked at Capital One for a while, went to consulting at Accenture. But the fantasy kind of, always played fantasy aside, but at Capital One, had a couple friends that we realized that we could take a lot of the predictive analytics, the predictive modeling that we were doing from a credit card standpoint. For me, it was fraud in my division, and apply that to fantasy football. And so, we started off just, went from home league to DFS, kind of started growing. The projections that I was making at that time were so elementary compared to what we are doing now. But at the time, you don't really have much actual projections on a weekly basis besides what Yahoo was cranking out for you or something. So found some early edge in that. And then as kind of continued to, find my footing in the various DFS places, realized that when you find kind of newer games that excited me the most, it was more of a challenge. And so that was best ball, more drafting stuff with Draft, the predecessor to Underdog. So heavily leaned into that. Found some other kind of successes around niches like second half NFL. Just kind of, decided, I could find, I could build my own model based off first half correlation to second half. And this is something that no one else is spending time on. So dive in. But as you said, I found a niche. I found ways to just kind of take advantage, become an advantage player within that world. And yeah.
What about with best ball specifically? I think I discovered you personally myself consuming fantasy football podcasts. This was around 3-4 seasons ago. I started getting into more best ball myself. I think you were a regular guest on the Establish the Run show, and you're obviously a contributing analyst with them right now, writing about best ball strategies. How did you get specifically into the best ball space versus DFS or, other variations of that format?
Yeah, I've been doing DFS for a while, back to 2012, 2013, when, a lot of us, not OGs or whatever, but a lot of people really started kind of diving into it. For me, the best ball was more of when Draft actually started. And so Draft, I joke around with Jeremy, who started it, hey, I called it a toilet app. And I mean that and with the most love of the people who were playing it were on the toilet. It was that easy that you didn't need these spreadsheets. You didn't need all the, I knew where the competition was in the DFS, and I swam in a different lane and saw that with their draft games, baseball was the biggest one. You play on a daily basis. People just didn't understand that the impact of weather on those games. And so people would get so pissed when a game gets rained out. And it's oh yeah, you could have just looked at the weather. And so that was just hey, finding an opportunity. And again, did my own kind of projections for baseball. I'm sure they were absolutely horrible compared to where we are now. But at the end of the day, all you were doing was peer-to-peer, competing against the others. Then for football, they started having some of the more taking the MFL 10 kind of best ball style, but making a tournament out of it. Had some early success there. And then when Underdog launched, just went all in there, won that first season. And yeah, got to know the ETR guys really well, started doing some content for them around best ball. Really, this game was, when I won, like this BBM didn't even sell out. It was, I think around like 50,000 or so entries, like, I don't know, tiny portion compared to today. And, but it's been great to see how much the game has grown, how many people are playing it, how much people enjoy it. Yeah.
And that kind of ties into what you're doing now, right? With predictq. For those who don't know, it's Justin's new prediction market community tagline, the edge you deserve, built for serious traders who want to learn from top performers, copy winning strategies, and compete in a ranked community. As I mentioned, launching in Q2 2026, currently has a long wait list of traders already signed up at predictq.market. And it's the kind of, makes me think of the best ball niche you're talking about, of like you being known as that one of the original best ball millionaires, right? Of best ball mania and Underdog. And now we have all the news with Underdog doing all these mass layoffs in their best ball department. People are worried that best ball, is it going to be declining in popularity? Do you see that kind of conflict with prediction markets? And I guess your overall thoughts on kind of you transitioning yourself from, I'm sure you still play a lot of fantasy, but transitioning into being like that product / tech leader for this new emerging markets, which is prediction markets.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question this is where the world is going. You can look at kind of like, just look at the communications from the top leaders like Jason Robbins from DraftKings said they're going to invest $400 million to convert people to prediction markets. FanDuel following suit. The Underdog, definitely making that, I don't want to call it a pivot, but definitely a shift to the prediction markets from the kind of more sports betting. And it's tough because there's a lot of, and it's a negative kind of feelings around prediction markets right now. I'd say in our community, definitely some because people feel like the draft games are being overlooked for that prediction markets. But then even beyond our community, the marketing around some of the prediction market stuff, like it's not good right now. Like, you see some advertisements that are saying like, hey, all you have to do is just know more football than your neighbor and you can make money. But like, because it is peer-to-peer. And yes, it is peer-to-peer. But you're not competing in prediction markets against your neighbor. Like you're competing against market makers. You're competing against some of the smartest experts out there. You're competing against, in some forms, like types of hedge funds that are doing algorithmic trading. And so this advertising, and then there's also like hey, come pay your rent with it. Like it's not good. And the facts of it are 70% of prediction market users are losing money. And in my opinion, 90% of those were probably dead on arrival and never really had a chance. And so what I'm hoping that we can do is take a lot of the types of content and tools from the DFS world and apply those from an educational standpoint for prediction markets. And so we have a really strong team, a lot of names that you guys are familiar with. Don't want to launch anything right now, but that's where a lot of this belief is. And from a prediction market standpoint, if we remove all of, the marketing, the, stuff that we can get into that I'm just not that much of a fan of, and I'm really hoping the industry grows through. But if you just make it at its most basic roots, what if I told you there was a sports book that will give you better odds than just about any other sports book out there? It will give you cash outs whenever you want them at about 25 to 30% better than what you were already getting. And if you actually become a profitable bettor, is never going to limit you. That's what a prediction market is. In that one fashion, it sounds amazing. Unfortunately, there's a ton of other baggage that is around the industry right now that hopefully I think we can all kind of I hope we grow out of.
In terms of who you think the predictq user is, do you think it's fantasy football players who are evolving to that next level of trying to gain an edge, sports bettors, et cetera? Because obviously there's a big driver right now of prediction market trading on politics. And there's a lot of legal battles trying to remove sports from it. Where do you see this? Because to me, when I look at it from the outside perspective, I have the apps on my phone. I don't really bet too much. Because I don't feel like I have an edge, right? So I'm kind of watching it from afar. But where does this eventually just become another form of sports betting, or do you truly? Because the way you describe it makes it seem like it truly is a different / better product than what sports books are offering. Will prediction markets get so commonplace where they're like, hey, you know what? Now we're going to start charging the VIG that DraftKings and FanDuel did, or is that just not possible happening?
Okay, so if we think about it from a sportsbook standpoint, I think they're content with, a lot of the sportsbooks are content with, hey, we're not going to kind of fight for those, you're betting an NFL side and we're taking our small percent and then we're getting heavily taxed out the wazoo from the states on it. And so that's why a lot of the prediction market, a lot of like the platforms have been happily moving into the prediction market space, kind of going with this is where they see the trend going. What I believe, and talking to some people who are far more, I'd say, in the know than I am, is that there is a chance that sports betting does get removed from prediction markets. It's probably in that lower side, maybe around like the 25%. There's a lot of noise right now from a Congress standpoint, but everyone mostly believes that it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and that's where this is going to come down to. The people fighting it right now really come down to the groups of, you have states that have already kind of spent the last 10 years getting legalized sports betting and figuring out a very high revenue taxation model on these sports betting. And then the lobbyists of the groups that they are partnered with, which are often the local, like in-person type casinos, the tribes, the other ones that have kind of vested interest in this. So where a lot of the smart people that I've talked to believe this is going to go is most likely these states will end up foregoing the fights after the Supreme Court ruling, and instead they'll move to like, hey, let's focus on taxation, getting that same level of revenue that we did from sports betting to the prediction markets. For me, with a larger kind of thesis on the prediction markets and where I see it going, I think right now from like a 2026 standpoint, like we are going to see the major sports books really pushing prediction markets as kind of that, hey, this is how you bet on sports. This is the future of how you're going to make your daily, pick a side. Maybe there's parlays, like there's props. There's a lot of growth to be had here. But I'm not going to say like, if you're a fantasy sports player and you were not that much into sports betting, you're probably not going to be that much into prediction markets either.
Right.
But if you were someone who liked to sports bet, you like to find your props, you like to kind of find edge, you like to maybe do it from an entertainment standpoint, like that's where I do think you'll see the most similarities. And it should be a better user experience for those people. When you then look beyond just sports, I think there is a lot of kind of growth, a lot of kind of interesting things happening from the other domains, but politics, culture, business, like all of that, there's a strong place for it. Is it going to be interesting for the people who are in fantasy sports and sports betting? I don't know. Maybe not, but like, I'm not here to try to sell you on that. For our for our community, like a lot of that focus really is how can we make this a better user experience prediction markets for the people who are coming over from sports?
When it comes to like all the modeling you talked about, you did to gain an edge, whether it's DFS, best ball, sports betting, etc., that's all sports, right? So like, are you just focusing on the sports angle now of prediction markets, or what are you similar type of methods you're using? What are you using to gain an edge? Are you betting on things that are obviously not sports as well, politics, weather, just all the random stuff that these markets are currently offering?
Yeah. So with the platform, we are going for far more of a marketplace model than trying to be the experts on everything. And, you've got some amazing companies in the DFS world that we're all familiar with that have done great content, from me with Establish the Run to all the other sites out there too. But at the end of the day, like that's sports. Prediction markets cover far more than just sports. If you go in there, you'll see like just from the drop down, you've got sports, politics, culture, mentions, weather, business, crypto, econ. I think even like I'm sure there's more that I'm not thinking of. It's impossible for us to be experts on all of those. But what we're creating is a marketplace dynamic where prediction market traders can connect to the people that are domain experts. So we'll have a ranking system that people can actually see, hey, here are the best traders in this different kind of sector. And if those people want to, they can now come onto the site and maybe sell a subscription service to their content. As well, for tools. We talked to someone who's built a really cool tool, but he only has 20 Twitter followers. And he is not looking to make that his full-time job. So he can kind of, hey, take that tool, put it on our platform. Then you provide access to the prediction market users who maybe don't have the resources to go code out their own mentions markets tool or their own weather kind of tool for using prediction markets.
So you're not like just giving out prediction market advice. You're building a platform where people can come see transparency, who's better than others, who they should be following. the most basic version I think of is you go to Fantasy Pros, you see who the most accurate rankers are, right? For people who participate in that platform. With sports betting, I feel like that's very vague as well. I've always wished there was a really cohesive system out there to track, like, or at least like who gives out props or who touts themselves on Twitter. How can we track that, right? And I guess that's the hardest part about sports betting, at least how I see it.
And that's one of the things that excites me around the prediction market side of things is sports betting. Like, yeah, you can go say I'm 32-0 and I never lose, or, you know, all of those are on minus 10,000 type bets, or I have this kind of record. I've made this kind of money. I'm photoshopping bet slips. Like, if you're using some of the prediction market platforms where you have far more open access, like on Polymarket, every single user, you can see all of their trading activity. On Kalshi, if you opt in, we can then also see all that trading activity, and we'll see what it looks like on the other platforms as they emerge. But for the people who are going to be like, hey, even if you're just on the sports side, you want to show that you have an edge, like, boom, you don't need to, you can't fake it anymore. Now, if you're going to only be trading on DraftKings predicts, and then you're coming over to prediction marketplace and saying you're having this 32-0 record because DraftKings is keeping a more kind of one-to-one private relationship, then, hey, that person is doing the same thing they're doing in the sports betting, but now you have options to compare them to someone else whose track record has that level of authenticity.
Now, when it comes to, like, obviously not limiting people, because if you are successful at sports betting, you will get limited early and often. Who's to say that that's not going to change, right? Like, once they become so mainstream or commonplace, or is that just not possible?
Okay. So this is an interesting one. In theory, the limiting won't happen because you don't actually have a one sports book behind the scenes that is determining, hey, here's who I'm trading with. Once I see that you're good, you're getting closing line value, I'm going to stop trading with you. With the prediction markets, what it is you have a bunch of market makers on one side who are putting in the order flow. They're the ones saying, hey, I want this action at this price. And you can then be a taker on the other side and say, okay, I'm willing to take that. And the market makers don't really have a say in who's taking their action. So if you believe that, let's use Masters coming up, you believe that Bryson's odds of winning are 9% or 9.2%, and the market feels that it's only 7 or 8 or something. If you are actually more accurate than the market, like, you can continue to take that price point until it gets to a place where now you no longer feel there's value and no one can stop you on that. So that's the idea, that there's no one there to limit you. Now, there is a small kind of thing I would say is when you're starting to do things like parlays, it's an RFQ. It's actually a request for a quote. So it's not just, hey, you take what's out there. You actually say, I want to put this single game parlay or this parlay in. And then people will quote you and decide whether or not they give you that action and at what price. In that one, there's currently a discussion right now of should that be fully anonymous, or should the market makers be able to say, hey, I don't want to give this person action. So there's an interesting kind of dynamic of, is the limiting now happening on a peer-to-peer from that? Or, you know, but then when I mention, if you're just a pure taker and you just see the prices out there, no one can stop you from taking at whatever price is available.
So it's essentially like a market of makers and takers, like the way you're kind of, and it makes you seem like, okay, well, the sportsbook operators are the sharks in that sense. They're charging you the vig. They're trying to hide the vig in certain scenarios for futures betting and props and things like that. So in this case, you have to be careful about certain makers, right? Because they could be trying to lure you into a trap as well. And there's maybe less regulation around that. I'm not sure, really. What do people need to be careful about when they're first kind of getting on and getting their feet wet, I guess, with prediction markets to begin with?
I think it's first is just an understanding of how the markets work, because it feels far more like you are trading in a financial situation than you are just, hey, making a minus 110 bet. Like prices wise, it's not, hey, I'm betting $10 to win $9 or something like that, but it's based off you are buying these contracts. Each contract is worth $1 if you win, and you're getting quoted at what you have to pay to get involved in that contract. So for example, if the price to you is at 10 cents and then you win $1 for every 10 cents. So you have to think through, like, okay, what are my odds on that? Well, my payout is I'm getting 9x. So on my 10 cents, I'm making 90 cents. And so my likelihood has to be better than what? About like 11% for me to want to take that bet. Or the other side of it is, okay, this is something that it's a favorite. I have to pay 75 cents to, take the favorite in this matchup. And for if I want to bet 10, if I want to put down $10, I'm betting $10 on the 75 cents. And if it's paid out, well, now I'm winning an extra 25 cents on each of those. So you have to think through, like, the math is a little different on what the probability has to be for me to hit that one. And that's where, like, it's not the most simple when we think through, like, hey, we're numbers guys. We live in the fantasy sports. Like, numbers are a key element. My friends who just, like, we're sitting at the bar, you want to bet on a game, you go and you pick your team. Like, it's not that clean right now. It's not that easy. And so hopefully that's one of the things that, like, through just being part of a kind of a community that is involved in prediction markets, like, people can kind of help each other learn. So that's what I'd say, like, just from a technical standpoint, the bigger picture just is, and I mentioned it earlier, but, like, the peer-to-peer element is, like, you are going against some of the sharpest people. Like, let's use golf as an example. Rufus Peabody, one of the sharpest kind of, I'd say, golf bettors out there. He's been heavily involved in the prediction market streets and being in a market maker for these golf prices because he has his own models. He says, like, hey, these golfers have this likelihood of winning. And so he's willing to give action up until, like, his, whatever his safety point is. That's fine if you want to get the money down. To be fair, you probably didn't have an edge on DraftKings to begin with. You don't have an edge on Rufus Peabody, but there are markets that you maybe do have an edge on because a lot of these market makers, they're actually getting paid a small percentage for putting liquidity out there. So they'll run algorithmically created, like, they'll basically run their algorithm. It's tech driven across all markets, and they'll kind of find, like, hey, I'm willing to give it this price, take it this price, and leave a little margins. They're always taking a little profit. If you have the ability to identify, like, a niche market that no one's truly an expert on, there is an opportunity to really capitalize on that. I'll use one example is just like weather in an individual city. All of the weather markets, the people who are doing it from a market maker standpoint, they are using very similar data sources to actually predict, like, what the weather is going to be. But if you are actually focusing on, like, individual one markets and you become the expert there, you can identify patterns. Like, I lived in San Francisco, we had microclimates. You can see, like, it's a lot easier kind of if you have your, just personal, your experience of watching that market, learning from it. Maybe this is how it differs from, like, a larger just kind of algorithmic model standpoint. I do think there are niche areas similar to how, we've always talked about WNBA props. Like, sure, you can get edge, but you're going to get limited. Here, find your niche, find the area that you think there's a skill set, that you have a kind of skill set around, and hey, you can be profitable.
And the way you made it seem like you think it's going to play out with possibly them removing sports from the equation, but then you see FanDuel, DraftKings getting into prediction markets. And if it becomes so mainstream, FanDuel and DraftKings get involved, then their sports betting product would essentially go away at some point because the popularity would go there, or would they still just have, we have a sports book, we have a prediction market. Do you see it playing? What if sports stays on prediction markets? Then how do you see that dynamic playing out?
So I do believe sports will play. I think it's about, from what I was talking to other people, they believe it's about a 25% chance that sports gets removed. So I think most likely sports does stay. Okay. And most of the at least the online, the digital sports books, they want this to happen. They want a world where they don't have to pay these ridiculous state-by-state legislation, the insane taxing. Like, they're happy to say, you know what, for the actual bets and these sides, like, yeah, we decrease a little of our risk. We also just we're content in taking this kind of small vig from it. And it's a lot better of a fee structure and taxation standpoint. Now, this is me purely speculating, but I believe that the pick'em style, the single game pick'ems, the parlay, that, I think sports books where they're getting something around like a 28% hold, they would love to continue to get that. And to be fair, that kind of falls under the fantasy purview. So, like, they could, say, hey, all of our sportsbook operations, let's move to the more prediction model. And let's then, from a fantasy angle, we can still take those picks. Now, there's probably some level of, like, an innovator's dilemma standpoint with large corporations where are you willing to risk your cash cow to avoid becoming the next blockbuster? And so maybe that's also part of the DraftKings FanDuel mindset is, hey, if we don't lean into this, we're just going to get crushed on price by these markets that are able to kind of, hey, the price, like if you, Novig's probably the best example where they're not actually taking a fee. Your price on each one is basically just fair value. Like you're getting 50-50 on it. And so long term, they may just say, hey, if we don't move into the prediction market, then we're just going to lose out on that. So why not just kind of skate to where the puck's going?
You mentioned the legal picture, right? And it's pretty wild right now because it seems like it's getting more and more into the mainstream just when you can't think it get more popular than it is already. 8 bills in Congress, like 20 plus lawsuits and counting, the whole Donald Trump Jr. element. So it's entered the political realm as well outside of just Congress itself. I guess a two-pronged question, like, does that affect what you guys are trying to build and grow with, a product that you're looking to launch? You haven't even launched it yet, but you're looking to launch it soon. And then second of all, is this controversy maybe even helping the just growth overall of prediction markets?
Yeah, if you look at the actual numbers like Kalshi and like from a signups wise, the controversy has helped them. It sucks, but like from a pure numbers wise, it has. From the larger industry, no, I don't think it's helped. I think it's substantially hurt. From everything I've seen, the prediction market side, and this is specifically Kalshi because they're the ones who made the lawsuit to the, that actually got us to where we are today. Like the law is on their side, whether you like it or not, and it's likely where we're going. All the Congress stuff, I believe it's just noise. A lot of it's just grandstanding. It's highly unlikely to have anything happen specifically with Donald Trump and, and with his sons involved on both the boards of Kalshi and Polymarket. And so what everyone really believes is just this will go to the Supreme Court, and that's where the decision will be made. From me, with a company standpoint, we are talking to the people to make sure that we understand like what the risks are. When we're talking to investors, like at the end of the day, you're still seeing billions of dollars being invested in these companies. And that's with the understanding that like the sports section could still be removed as a risk. So like there still is a lot of optimism around the larger opportunity for prediction markets. It may look very different than what it is today. I think it hopefully will look very different than it is today. I think like when you look at the death markets, when you look at kind of the regulatory standpoint, there is still Polymarket and Kalshi, and they're very vocal about this. Polymarket predominantly is not a US company. And like they still are operating their international products that are not under our regulatory lens. And so things like the death markets, some of the insider trading aspects, like Kalshi's trying to be very vocal around, hey, we play by the US rules. Here's how prediction markets should look. And Polymarket is more of, hey, they're still outside of the US and trying to bring a US product in. And there's a lot of like bickering back and forth. We were used to it with the DraftKings and FanDuel kind of days in our world, but I think this actually has a little more vitriol behind it between them. But my hope is that like adults prevail, and we are still very, very kind of early days of what prediction markets are going to look like going forward.
Is this a future where you see like you turn on CNN and it's like they have Kalshi odds on the screen, right? Of like
it's already happening. Yeah, MSNBC already has that partnership. If you watched one of the award shows recently, they had a partnership with Polymarket where they were showing who Polymarket picked, and I think Polymarket ended up showing like all but one correct, and people got really pissed. I'm like, yeah, just use you can doesn't mean you should. Like, yeah, just because you have that data, like, I don't know, maybe let us watch the actual awards ceremony. Like there's just some dumb decisions that are being made. But again, like I think, yeah.
Without pulling back the curtain too much, when you guys do launch, do you have a specific month in mind, a date, and what should fans expect in terms of just the overall user experience of predictq 1.0?
Yeah, my tech team would kill me if I put out a fake date right now that they have to then line up to. So I'm not going to do that. But I'd say most likely, like a lot, I'd say community first. And so one of the things that we've learned from the daily fantasy sports space, I think of it as the early days of roto grinders with the forums and everything. Like, and even before that, like the 2+2 and the pocket fives, like of the poker world, like the community aspect was huge, I think, from an educational standpoint, and just having people kind of feel like they do belong. Because so much of the current kind of entry point for prediction market users is I see an advertisement, I click in, I go in, I'm a little confused, I put something down, I lose, and I'm just feel burned and I'm never coming back. Like, that's not good for the platforms. That's not good for the ecosystem. We feel, hopefully we want to make that introduction to this space far more valuable. So like I'll be writing some content. I'm going to be doing a lot of long shot NFL stuff where you get optionality throughout the season. Where if I wanted to say, we think of it now like if you make a bet before the season on who's going to win the Super Bowl, the only way you really win that bet is if you pick the team that's going to win the Super Bowl. Because if you try to cash out at any time, you're taking on average 20 to 25% less than market fair value. But with prediction markets, you can take that bet, but know that you're planning to actually cash out around week 4, week 5. Maybe this team has like a strong start. Like an easy schedule, and you think they're going to get off to a strong start and their odds are going to improve. You can then cash out and you're getting it at fair value. So I think those are the type of kind of journeys that I can share about what I'm going to be doing with prediction markets that hopefully people can kind of join in, learn from.
And like, what is the reason behind the timing of this? Because I heard about peer-to-peer trading markets even before I heard of Kalshi, Polymarket. Why are these two the ones that are so mainstream now?
Okay, so I'd say 10 plus years ago, a company called Augur was probably one of the first ones to do prediction markets. There was even a sports focus. It was purely decentralized, blockchain based. But regulatory wise, it just did not work. You then have a few other companies that have been kind of trying to make it. Kalshi was the first one who actually said, hey, we believe that the law is on our side, that this should be fully legal in the US, and we're going to sue the US government to get it done. And as a startup, that is a crazy idea because the amount of that you pay, the time that it takes to it, like most startups are never going to exist. Are never going to survive that fight. But they did, they won that fight. And that's why you can now have CFTC licenses for these prediction markets. It started off heavily with the politics, with the presidential elections, and then moved into more of the sports side. But that's why so much has been happening over the past couple of years, is because of that court case that was won.
When it comes to modeling with your product and predictq and what you intend to offer, how does AI play a role, if at all, in what you guys are building on the tech side of things?
Yeah, AI is huge. There's some really fun things that we're going to be doing for the users. So, for example, we have a lot of historical data on the prediction market. So, at the most basic level, we're going to create an LLM wrapper that'll allow you to, as if you're talking to Claude or any of the kind of chatbots, but specifically with prediction market data. You can also, we're hoping to actually allow you to go build your own agents, build your own bots that maybe can trade on, maybe it's a copy trading, maybe it's an arbitrage opportunity bot, but create that kind of framework for people who aren't as tech savvy to actually go out and deploy an agent that can trade for you. And so there's definitely some cool from that. The other, if we want to get a little crazy, we are building this site designed for agents to actually come and be our customers. And so I don't know how many people here have actually started exploring things like OpenClaw and different forms of AI agents. But there's a lot of kind of agents that are doing the research, that are doing the actual anywhere from assisting to augmenting to actually, acting on your behalf. So we're building our data structure so that agents can actually come onto the site, use the X402 crypto protocol to make payment. We can collect their payment, and there's actually no human interaction there. It's just your agent is becoming a lot smarter by getting all access to our data. And then what it does with it is up to the person who's using that agent.
Yeah, that's all fascinating to see what you guys are doing there. And you're obviously, as much as you can, you're bringing the more ethical, practical approach to actually giving people an edge rather than touting yourself and saying, here's what to go bet, here's what to go trade on. And I think that's ultimately what's going to bring the most value in educating people along the way as well, for sure. And just speaking about what you've done throughout your whole content career, really, in the fantasy space of educating people, especially on the topic of best ball, we'll kind of transition to that for these last few minutes here. Is you have one article up on Established to Run so far for the offseason of what to think about when you're on the clock in a best ball draft. What are the most important factors to consider when drafting the team, ADP value, roster construction, week 17 correlation, et cetera, et cetera. Transitioning to the best ball strategy part, you're obviously still heavily in those streets. How much have things changed best ball strategy wise in terms of where the market is now, the competition you have to play against? Because it seems like everyone's trying to adopt these rules. So how do you still gain an edge in best ball compared to when you first started?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely there are far less just dead money, far less fish. Like the overall kind of like foundational understanding, that baseline has definitely collectively improved. So I think before you could just expect that, hey, in each draft you were going to have like one or two dead money paying the rake, and it might still be the case, maybe more so in August, but for the most part, like that's definitely so. Now the key is, how can we continue to kind of find edge on an annual basis? And I think it often comes down to, for this year, for the last year, for probably this year too, is what is the meta for that year? Like, what is the structural aspects that other people are kind of incorrectly leaning into, that the masses are kind of overplaying? And, you know, I could say like there are themes for the drafts that are going on right now. For example, like the top QBs are way underdrafted. It's corrected a little in the past few weeks, but like early on, there was just a heavy value in kind of taking those early ones. Now, after the NFL draft, when we had the mainstream launch, like who knows, that might be completely gone. Also, those are going to be 18 rounds versus the ones right now are 20 rounds. So a lot of it really is understanding like, hey, what is the meta for that year? And I'll still be doing content at ETR. I'll still be doing my podcast, still be kind of talking through. I'm always active on Twitter. So, I mean, like as we identify those, always happy to kind of chat through them. But yeah, it's really focusing on just for that year. What are we going to do with the early running backs? What are we doing from a zero RB, hero RB, anchor RB? Like trying to get those things right for that year's structure, identifying where the market is probably overdrafting certain positions, where they're maybe light on, maybe a higher risk type strategy because of tight end, where there's maybe tier breaks and such. Like those are the things that are important for us to really identify for the year.
You've got your best ball strategy food pyramid here on your article and breaking it down into those 6 pillars. And I feel like maybe a year or 2 years ago, week 17 talk was like all the rage and people were over accounting for it. You obviously have it as a key pillar here, but it's the least important at the end of the day, kind of the cherry on top of your strategy. Is that still something you think is being overrated by just the general player pool here, or is like week 15 and 16 as important, or are those even less important than week 17?
Yeah, I'm personally, from a math standpoint, like week 17 is still where it really matters from like the playoffs aspects. You can kind of say where like, hey, each round has its own level of value and you still need to advance to the finals. But at the end of the day, the money really is in those top 5 spots of the finals, and the percent chance of getting to that top is far, far, far less than finishing 1 out of 16, 1 out of 12, which comes out to what, like 7%, something like that. For the week 17, I'd say the thing that I think is probably still underutilized, despite how often we talk about it, is stacking. And I'm not talking so much about like the week 17, game stacking, but like the actual stacking on your team. It has so much value from both like an advancing through the regular season and then still advancing in each of those playoff weeks and to the finals. That's probably the still underutilized strategy. For the actual week 17 standpoint, we've run the numbers on this, and I'd say the only time that it's actually being overutilized is when it's a very common pairing. Use the, Dak and Amon-Ra St. Brown like 2 years ago, where they were on the turn. They played each other in week 17. It was just like, yeah, I'm going to overtake these two guys. But across the rest of the draft, if you were to say more like a Dak and I'm trying to. I don't even know if Jameson Williams was there this year. If this was maybe it was his rookie year, but maybe you could consider someone like a Dave Montgomery. Like here, you're getting a little more of a unique. They don't align perfectly in that part of the draft, so that people are just overdoing it.
When it comes to the roster construction, obviously the most important thing, foundation. At the end of the day, I see, it's been more commonplace, I think, or acceptable to draft 3 quarterbacks, to draft 3 tight ends, even going as far as 4 tight ends as you have here. Do you think is 4 quarterbacks pushing it? Do you think that's an option here, or are you kind of trying to stay away from the extremes there?
Yeah, if you're doing a 20-round draft, it's possible. But the thing is, with the quarterbacks, at least in the current meta, is if you're doing 4 quarterbacks, you're probably also reaching on 1 or 2 quarterbacks that may not even start. And like the difference between a 13th round running back and a 17th round running back like isn't that much of a difference, but the difference in a 13th round starting QB and one at the ends that may not be starting like is really substantial. So it's almost always worth it for, instead of drafting that fourth QB, like take your second and third QB a little earlier and then grab that extra running back wide receiver later on. Why it works for a tight end versus QB is a couple of reasons. One is tight ends don't score nearly as much as quarterbacks. And so if you're taking 4 tight ends, you're really not doing it because you're trying to piecemeal, like, give me 6 points out of one of them. You're doing it that hope that one of those really busts out and becomes like a Harold Fannin, or each year you always see these late tight ends really go for it. Also, yeah, if you have a QB getting 0, like that's really, really penile for you. For the tight ends as well, if you actually have 2 of those break out, you can occasionally use one of those in your flex. If you have 2 QBs break out, like one of them's just kind of busto, like it's not helping you for that week. So now I'm pretty much never doing 4 QBs.
You say 1 to 3 pass catchers or 1 to 2 running backs per stack, up to 3 stacks per team. Like, when do you get to a point where stacking is too much? Is it like 4 pass catchers with a quarterback? You think that's just overboard? Are you trying to keep it? Or is there any flexibility within those ranges you put on your pyramid there?
Yeah, it's less about the raw number and more about the draft capital of those. So let's use the Bengals as an example, where if you had Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, you probably don't need to go grab the Andre Yosevas or like that Mike Gesicki or something like that, because you've already taken a lot of draft capital in the kind of elite guys. Now, if you were doing a let's think. Let's say you're going to go with the Giants, and you want to take some. You miss out, or maybe you grab Malik Neighbors or something, but maybe you miss out on him. But and now you want to grab 3 of those later ones, like an Isaiah Likely, maybe even Theo Johnson, where you grab both of them, throw in 1 or 2 wide receivers. Like, your draft capital isn't nearly as wide, and you're making an overall bet that the Giants' passing game outperforms. With the Bengals, we know the Bengals are going to do well. You're paying for the Bengals to do well. But if you can go for a QB and his pass catchers who are heavily discounted, but they actually outperform as a group, well, now that cohort, all of them surpass their value. And even though in a 1-game sample, they're not all going to hit, you got good value on them across the season. And 1 or 2 hitting as late picks is very valuable.
Just overall, obviously we're less than a month away from the draft now. It's going to be here in Pittsburgh in about 3 weeks. Pre-draft versus post-draft, right? Like, I think I haven't drafted a team in maybe a month, but right after the Super Bowl, I drafted 100 teams over the first 30 days. And I found some of the ADPs to be absolutely wild. And I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to worry about my portfolio exposure right now. I think I ended up with 50% Malik Willis and 40% Tyler Algier. And then I try to be somewhat reasonable on the other players. Like, what is your strategy? Super early in pre-draft versus post-draft, or you just kind of stick into the pyramid and whatever ADP value falls, that's what you're going to try to jump on?
Yeah, pre-draft, I think you had a pretty strong strategy. I am far more willing to go overboard on player ownership because I don't think the market is nearly as efficient as it will be come June, July, August. I think there are major opportunities that are just asymmetric upside, where if Malik Willis actually becomes the starting QB, and honestly, the run-up for Malik Willis kind of sucked. And there were far better opportunities that could have been for him. And he still is much more, is still more expensive than what he was when we were drafting him at 140, 50 or something. The biggest thing that I lean into that I don't really account for, that I haven't really talked much about in the regular season, is I'm focusing on talent over opportunity before the draft. Opportunity, it's kind of a mirage. It's a little fugazi. We don't really know. We don't have that much confidence. The Trey Benson thing, the Jordan Mason thing. You think you have these guys who are going to have great opportunities. We think someone might be the Seattle. You just don't know. And so much changes, where give me the ones who have the talent, and maybe they can find themselves either through an injury ahead of them, through a trade, through a free agent, through luck boxing, something. They can have that. When they have that role, you're going to pay off.
do you think there's a certain, I mean, I think I've heard you, I've heard others ask you this in previous years of when is the most optimal time to draft. I know Mike Leone talks about it in his best ball manifesto. Maybe those things change. I think the last I read, it was like sometime around July, late June, but just based on your experience, do you think there's anything to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, hey, if you're listening to a podcast right now about some best ball on, in March, first week of April, like you're doing this because you have like a love for the game, you really enjoy it. Just go ahead, draft all summer, draft when you want. Like the edge doesn't actually change enough that you should change your kind of life around it. That said, there is definitely more edge to draft later on. The reason why the July works is because you get a good amount of the news from the camp reports, the training camp kind of starting off, and the market hasn't truly reacted enough to some of the trends that'll happen. Now you might get some wrong, but the times you get it right, you're getting some strong value. For the August standpoint, like that's when you have, for me, I enjoy August the most because that's when I'm the most clued in. I mean, I've got the newsletter that I'm doing on a daily basis. I'm reading all the blurbs. I am I am as clued in as I possibly could. And so I feel like one of my edges is being able to navigate, hey, what really matters? What's just kind of noise? What we should actually react to? And I can draft accordingly for that. And so that's where I've seen my most value. So like last year, my big hit was on the drafters contest. I got second for 200K, and guess what? That was auto drafted. My entire portfolio, all 150 of them, were auto drafted. Yeah. Now, is it luck? If you want to say it is, sure, but I don't think that that's the only reason, because I did all those drafts within a couple days before the season started, because I identified that, hey, who are the guys that I have the biggest amount of information edge that I can really lean into? And unfortunately, that meant that I had to also exclude my player pool from some guys like Emeka Egbuka, who, even though I liked, he had been climbing up 5 rounds throughout the offseason. It wouldn't make sense for me to draft him at that point. But what I could do is draft guys like Daniel Jones and Jonathan Taylor, who prior to a week or so before I was drafting, people didn't even know Daniel Jones was going to be the starting QB. So he wasn't even drafted in all the drafts. And Jonathan Taylor was, if he was going to be Anthony Richardson, he should be nowhere near the second round. But now that we know he's with Daniel Jones, like he's so much of a better pick. So, and then Harold Fannin Jr., I think I ended up having like 40-50% of him because we saw through, obviously a lot of people liked him throughout the summer, but we had just more confidence that he was going to play a major role in that offense. And so that's where like lean into what your edges are. And for me, it was taking that information, being able to, and turn it into actionable insights.
Based off your customized rankings, right? Like, are you building season-long projections off that, or specifically for drafters? Are you tailoring it for underdog versus drafters, or how are you going about that yourself?
Yeah, so I use ETR ranks. I also am part of the team that's helping to create those. And so throughout the season while I'm drafting, if there are some player that I disagree on, then I'll go into our Slack and I'll say, hey, I think this player should be here. There will be a discussion on it, and we'll figure out whether we move that player and such. So that's kind of my core, hey, here's what I'm drafting off. Drafters, and then I'm going to kind of customize on a per tournament basis as well. So like drafters, I understand, like it's a season long, it's a cumulative style. I know who's been drafted where throughout the season. I know what that movement is. And so I will start off with the ETR ranks, and then I make my own individual adjustments, and then I draft off those. And if I'm auto drafting, I've talked through the strategy on my Twitter. People can kind of see, I put out the thread on what I'm doing, but I do it in batches. I do about 10 of them. I see where I'm drafted. I'm seeing where I'm overpaying for guys. I make some adjustments and then continue to do it.
How many best ball drafts does Justin Herzig have under his belt so far as of early April 2026?
About 100, 150, I'd say. I was similar to you for the first month, like right before the NFL, right before the Super Bowl, right after, was going very hard. But I don't think I've drafted much, if any, the past 3 or 4 weeks. A lot of that is because the information kind of just became stagnant. And so we weren't really, you were already at a bit of a disadvantage before. And I think there's just not as much edge as there was early on in the drafting. So it hasn't been as exciting or enticing for me to be drafting.
Yeah, all mine were done pre-combine, pre-free agency, obviously. And I feel like, like I'm invested now. So I'm going to draft as many teams as I can. But you know what? I'm not going to be as invested in the combine, as invested in like live free agency news. And I think there's a lot of overreactions in that sense as well. I agree with you on the run out for Malik Willis. I wasn't super excited about it. I'm really not excited about Tyler Allgeier's landing spot in Arizona, where if he's an early down back for a team that's 1-15, is how many goal line opportunities is he really going to get? Even though there probably is still value on him overall. But definitely not a player I'm going to be going out of my way to take because I think his ADP will keep going up anyways. Who's one player now you might be drafting as often as you were a month or two ago that you think pre-draft still there is value, or maybe the market is wrong on going into the draft?
Okay, let me look at my exposures as we're doing this.
And by the way, the only other guy I had over 33% was tight end was Terrence Ferguson. So that's my other guy.
There you go. All right, look at my exposures. My one of my highest players was Nicholas Singleton. Really liked that one up until the injury, and then obviously, that he went from literally wasn't ranked before when like Underdog launched, and then so he was such a value, and then the injury happened. That was unfortunate. I'll go with Drake London. Obviously, like I think the ranks are only 5 or 6 different from what his ADP is, but when we're talking that high in the kind of beginning of the second, I think he should be kind of a 1-2 type turn guy. I think it's just, if you look at like he has the per game upside that kind of competes with just about anyone. If it is Michael Penix, we know that Michael Penix has a strong rapport and connection with him and one of the highest kind of concentrated target shares. If it is Tua supported elite wide receiver games before, you have the dome. There's minimal target competition for him. Like there's just a lot. I think that he just gets he just gets overlooked when I would take him like above Malik Neighbors with the injury. Let's see. I think we have him all the way up at pick 13. So ahead of a lot of those running backs like Achane, Ashton Genty, Saquon, Jeremiah Love. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I see his ADP right now as of March 31st as pick 20. But I mean, yeah, we're talking about wide receivers overall. I mean, I'd rather have Drake London over Malik Neighbors, like you're talking about. I'd rather have him over Justin Jefferson, at least for now. That's just my kind of, especially in full PPR or DraftKings. I mean, I love taking Drake London early second round. I'm glad because I've heard some people kind of out on him heading into this next season, but Kyle Pitts' success came when Drake London was essentially injured, and I think that people are overrating Kyle Pitts to an extent, underrating Drake London right now. Who's one guy do you think that the market is overrating right now that's going too high?
Zach Charbonnet. I don't know if people just aren't accounting for this injury. Maybe this is one where I talked about like, they're like, oh, well, there's no one else there. So he's obviously going to be the starting running back when he gets back. And if he misses a little, I don't care. But like, I think he's going to miss a lot. I think we may not see like him until week 10, in that time period, week 10, maybe even later. And then when he does come back, not sure what his role is actually going to be. If Seattle brings in someone like Najee, like Charbonnet was never a bell cow with Seattle. Like he's still going to have some kind of split workload. And that's like best case scenario. And it's coming off the injury. So he's a guy that I am just kind of full fading, staying away from, and probably by like 30 or so, 30, 40 picks.
I mean, is there still a chance he could miss the entire season, right? I mean, that's
sure. Anything's possible there. I mean, yeah.
I was almost wondering if George Halani is worth like a late round pick now. No Kenneth Walker, no Zach Charbonnet. They haven't brought in anybody really of note, right? So,
damn. And again, like obviously he's like a 20th round pick, but again, that's where talent versus opportunity. I don't want to get sucked into but it could be this guy. But here's the thing: it could be a lot of guys. Right. It could be anyone in free agency. It could be any of the rookie running backs. It could be a trade because Seattle's actually a competitive team. Like just because George Halani, we've seen them use him before, and like he's the one that makes it's the easiest for our brain to come around. But like his actual likelihood is probably what, like 15% of like yeah.
You talk about betting on talent real quick. Last question I asked you on best ball rookies for the draft coming up. What are you using to evaluate talent? I'm sure you're involved with like dynasty rankings, rookie rankings at ETR, certain predictive models. Are you changing your opinions a lot based off combine results, RAS scores? Like, what are your thoughts on evaluating rookie talent pre-draft before we start wading opportunity into the whole thing?
Yeah, so I definitely trust a lot of kind of the voices on this from a talent perspective than evaluating myself. But what I have done myself is more from an analytical standpoint, from an analytics standpoint on a positional basis. So for me, I am far more likely to default running backs to draft capital than just about any other thing. And I know, grass and all that kind of it matters and their college scouting, but the data that I've seen is draft capital just is so immensely impactful that I'm willing to kind of lean into that. And so I'll trust the, as much as you can, like NFL mock draft database and places like that for where these players are going. Now, the one qualifier there is I will make sure to kind of, hey, is this a trotter? Is this a pass catcher? Figuring out that as well, because not every second round running back is, the same from a fantasy angle. So making sure you understand what this actual player's, profile is as a player, how they're going to score you points. Can they get the high value touches? But from there, it then turns into a draft capital. From a wide receiver, wide receiver, I think that's where talent really does matter. But it's hard for me to convince myself and say that, I'm able to actually evaluate the level of talent from this when the NFL teams really can't even themselves. And how you win as a wide receiver is just being good enough to be on the field. From a running back, you cannot be a great, but you can be a pass catcher and you're scoring points. Or maybe you find yourself a goal line role, but you find them. From a wide receiver, as a rookie, you're not going to just become this slot demon that's leading a Wando Robinson type role and you're just stacking up PPR. You need to earn your place in the field. You need to show that skill set. So it's far more is this player good? And that's where I'm just going to kind of trust others. And for draft capital, it's obviously important, but there's also the inverse aspect from a first round. The later you go, the better the team. So better QB, better scoring opportunity if you can crack the starting lineup. Earlier, you might have a worse QB. It all kind of plays out.
Yeah, I definitely hear you there. Saving kind of strong rookie takes for after the draft. When you see the landing spot, you see the draft capital, that's going to influence a lot of things for sure. Totally agree with that. Well, Justin, I really appreciate you coming on. It was very insightful hearing just everything you're working on within the prediction markets from your background as a fantasy football player as well. For those listening or watching, make sure to follow Justin on Twitter at Justin Herzig. That's HERZIG, predictq.market. Also, ffin60.com. Anything else you're working on, or where else can we find your content? Justin, you mentioned newsletters, podcasts, anything like that?
I appreciate it. And last one is just ETR, Establish the Run, for all the best ball stuff. I'll be doing podcasts, be doing drafts with them throughout the summer. That's what the rankings are. But this is awesome. I really appreciate the conversation. This is fun. And if anybody has any questions about this stuff, or feel free, send me a DM on Twitter, reach out. Always happy to chat.
All right. Appreciate it, Justin. Appreciate everybody.